Hello, good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
With your permission, can we start now, ma'am?
Yes, sure. Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm
Okay.
ready to start. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, once again, good morning to all the participants connected here. Myself, Swati Verma, Assistant Professor, Electronics and Telecommunication Department, Sri Shankaracharya Group of Institutions. On behalf of all organizing committee, my institute and AICT, I welcome you on the fifth day, the last day session of our workshop and of our FDP entitled Material Modeling for Nanoelectronic Devices. Today also we will have two expert talks. First talk will be given by Dr. Munima ma'am from Guwahati. The second talk will be given by Dr. Mohanlal Verma sir, our coordinator from Sri Shankaracharya Group of Institution. And then we will have a lab session of 2 hours, which will be instructed by Dr. Ashok sir from Bhatinda and Dr. Arun sir from Himachal Pradesh. Then next, at the last, we will have a yoga and meditation session for our participants and all the speakers, which will be instructed by Mr. Rajiv Nair sir from CSIJ Durg. So now we are proceeding for our first lecture. The title of the talk is Defects in Interface Structure, a DFT study, which will be given by our resource person, Dr. Munima B. Saharia ma'am, from Institute of Advanced Study in Science and Technology, Guwahati. Ma'am is working as assistant professor in the Advanced Materials Science Group at the Institute of Advanced Study in Science and Technology, Guwahati, an autonomous institute under Departments of Science and Technology, Government of India. She completed her bachelor's and master degree in physics from Guwahati University, Guwahati, and PhD in physics from IIT Guwahati. She initiated the computational research work at ISET in the field of condensed matter physics. Dr. Munima ma'am has already completed two fast-track projects funded by DST under Government of India and is at present acting as the principal investigator of another project funded by the same agency. Her research interest is in the field of electronic, magnetic, and the lattice dynamical properties of novel materials using first principle computations. Once again, I welcome you, ma'am. Thanking for accepting our invitation and sharing your valuable time with us. I request you, ma'am, to please start your presentation. We are waiting to hear
Okay.
from you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all
Yes, ma'am.
for giving me the opportunity to share some of my work with you all. So, shall I start my presentation?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So, how about the transition? Is going on fast?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. So, good morning, one and all present here. Today I'm going to give, or I would rather say that I would like to share some of the work that we have been doing here at ISST. The title of my talk is Defects in Interface Structure, a DFT study. Well, my institute, let me very briefly give an introduction to my institute where I work. So my institute, ISST, is situated in the northeastern state of India, that is Assam. And Guwahati is the capital of Assam. So the Institute of Advanced Study in Science and Technology, shortly known as IASST, is situated in Guwahati. Well, so coming straight to the motivation of this particular work, actually interfaces, they are known to act as a very promising materials to address the challenge of fusion structural materials. Okay, and in order to enhance the performance of these materials, it is very essential to study the effect and the crucial role of defects in these interface structures. Now, what are structural materials actually? So structural materials are those materials which can perform at extreme conditions. Now, what are those extreme conditions? They can be either extreme stress or temperature or irradiation dose or corrosive environment. Now, why do people want to study about structural materials? Because they have huge applications in next generation automotive, aerospace, and nuclear power reactors. Now, the point here is that the increased demands of these future technologies in these particular fields, they actually cannot be made by just the incremental improvements to the already existing conventional materials. So one has to proceed to design new material concepts in order to enhance the performance and in order to meet the future demands. Now, if we come straight to the structural materials which are used in fusion reactors, so basically we are interested in the structural materials which are used in the first wall and the blanket materials, and the blanket portion of the fusion reactors. So, what are the factors that are important, or what are the factors that we have to look into? So, the prime factor which one has to take care of in case of fusion reactors or in case of structural materials in fusion reactors is the radiation damage. Because radiation damage, it is actually the second most challenging factor once the controlled thermonuclear reaction has been achieved in fusion power reactors. So controlled thermonuclear reaction was the first hurdle that was more or less successfully completed or passed, and now the radiation damage has posed to be a major threat for the structural materials in fusion reactors. This radiation damage, in fact, it takes a decisive role in deciding the lifetime of the first wall and the blanket materials of fusion reactors. Now, in order to devise or in order to design new materials for this fusion reactors, first wall and blanket material for fusion reactors, we need to understand what actually happens when the first neutrons, which are produced in the nuclear reactions inside the fusion reactors, when they hit and then interact with the lattice atoms of a solid target. So that is our main purpose, that we need to, first we need to know that what actually happens inside the solid or inside the structural material when the very first neutrons hit them or bombard them. Well, when the energetic neutrons, highly energetic neutrons, they enter or they hit or bombard the solid or the structure of the structural material, then two things may happen. First of all, two phenomena may take place. First of all, they can transfer energy to the atoms in the solid, and if the transferred energy is sufficient to displace the atom, then the atom gets displaced from its regular site, thereby forming a vacancy interstitial pair, which is also known as the Frankel defect. So we get the atom at an interstitial position and the vacancy at the normal position or the normal site of the atom. So this we call the vacancy interstitial defect or Frankel defect. Then another phenomena may take place that if the energy of the neutrons are high enough or too high, then it may initiate an N-alpha nuclear reaction in which some transmuted products are released. Basically, we are talking about the N-alpha reaction in which helium atoms are or helium nuclei are released. So the point defects, that is these are the two basic phenomena that occurs. One is the formation of vacancy interstitial pairs, that is the Frankel defect, and another is the is that we get some transmuted products from the nuclear reaction, and we are basically considering here the N-alpha reaction, and we are considering the helium atoms. Now, point defects, why they are harmful? Because they form void swellings inside the solid and thereby cause structural damage of the system. And in case of impurities like helium, what they do, they form some bubbles, okay, inside the material, and they also cause structural damage. So both these phenomena are responsible for the structural damage of the material or the structural material, and thereby they reduce the lifetime of the material. Now, in case of fission reactor, actually it is the formation of point defects which are more prominent. But in case of fusion reactors, since the energy of the neutrons are much higher than in the case of fission reactors, so both the cases are prevalent. Okay. So we are more interested in the effect of impurities because one major problem with impurity is that unlike point defects, impurities have no opposite defect to recombine it. So if we have a interstitial, if we have a self-interstitial, then we have a vacancy. So if we can somehow manage to recombine the interstitial and the vacancy, then we can do away with the defect. But in case of impurity, we do not have a opposite entity so that we can recombine them and do away with that particular defect. Now, the noble gases like helium are of they are of more threat. The threat is higher because they are chemically inert and they are insoluble, and then in the solid or in the metal of our concern. So what happens is that if it crosses a critical volume, then the gas-filled bubbles inside the crystalline, they grow and they form voids by capturing one after another the vacancies and thereby damaging the structure. So it is actually very much important to understand or to assess the helium-induced degradation in nuclear materials in order to predict the lifetime of the material. So this is up to this. It was all about the importance of importance and motivation of our work. Now let us come to bulk nanocomposites. So bulk nanocomposite with stable interfaces stable interfaces has been found to be very good systems which can enhance the vacancy interstitial recombination, and also the stable interfaces, they provide good sites or efficient sites for trapping the heliums in their stable form. One factor is that the thickness of the materials or thickness of the slabs which form the interface. So if we have a suitable thickness, then they can actually act as very good sinks for point defects, and also can act as good trapping. They can also offer good trapping sites for the helium atoms. And another thing is that it has there has been many study already, some experimental and some simulation and theoretical study also, and it has been found that metal-metal interfaces with stable two metals with a very stable interface, they actually are good structural materials for very harsh conditions. Well, so let us now be more specific. So what we are working on is a layered nanocomposite of copper and niobium. That means we have one layer of copper. I mean, we have one after another layer of copper, alternate layers of copper and niobium. And why we have taken up this particular metal-metal layered nanocomposite is that back in 2007, there had been a very good work done by the Los Alamos National Laboratory, New Mexico, USA. So they did both the simulation as well as the experiment on this particular copper niobium layered nanocomposite. This is actually the simulation result. So what they did, they simulated a radiation cascade in pure copper as well as in pure niobium. And then they did the same thing in case of copper niobium layered nanocomposite. Now, both in case of pure copper solid and pure niobium solid, it was seen that the radiation cascade had some the defect. After some time, they said that they observed that the defects remain inside the solid. They cannot actually, both the point defects as well as the helium interstitials, they do not go away completely. So some residual defects are always there inside the pure solid. So after a long duration of time, these residual defects, they combine, they pile up, and they damage the structure. However, as you can see that if we, instead of the pure copper or pure niobium solid, if they take a copper niobium interface, so this is the copper slab, and this is the niobium slab, and this is the copper niobium interface, and they simulated the same radiation cascade in this case, and the reaction takes place. But after some time, after a very short interval of time, it was shown that this interface could consume all the defects that was produced or that was generated because of this radiation cascade. Now, these are the TAM images of the pure solid. In this case, we have shown only the copper. Here, you can clearly see that the radiation cascade has damaged the structure, whereas in this case, where we have copper and niobium layers stacked one over the another, there is actually no damage caused. Now, in order to proceed with some computational works in copper niobium system or copper niobium interface system, first of all, we need to know what is the structure. What is the structure of the interface? So when what is the stable structure of copper niobium interface? The stable structure of copper niobium interface actually follow the KS orientation relation. Now, what is KS orientation relation? According to KS orientation relation, the 111 planes of FCC copper, they actually stack over the 110 planes of the BCC niobium. So here, for the easy reference, I have shown what is the 111 plane of cubic copper, FCC copper, and the 110 plane of cubic BCC niobium. And this is a schematic diagram of the KS-oriented FCC BCC interface. So the this is actually the direction. So 111 plane means 110 direction of the FCC crystal and 111 direction of the BCC crystal. So this is the schematic diagram for the KS orientation. Well, now this is the interface topology of the copper niobium interface structure with KS orientation. Now, with KS orientation, the interface is actually a semi-coherent interface. Now, what is exactly a semi-coherent interface means is that obviously, since the structures are different, so in the interfacial layers, the copper atoms and the niobium atoms are not going to sit over one another in all the sites. But the semi-coherent means at some particular sites, so as my cursor goes, so at these sites which are equally spaced from one another, actually the copper atom is sitting exactly at the top of niobium atom. So if I enhance one of these sites, then we can see that at this particular site, the copper atom and the niobium atom are sitting at the top of each other, whereas there are distortions. There are sufficient amount of distortion around it. Now, these particular sites where the both the atoms sit over one another, we call those sites as misfit, the MDI sites. misfit dislocation intersection sites. We call them as misfit dislocation intersection sites. So this term we will be using when we describe the defects. Now, next thing is that in order to start with the computations, we have to start with a unit cell. So what unit cell will take for the computations, to start the computations. What we have done is that we followed the unit cell. We took up the unit cell which was proposed by the Matsanorks groups in Uppsala University, Sweden. So what they proposed is that if we take the unit cell which are bounded by 4 neighboring MDI sites, then that can they called it as a quasi unit cell. So this unit cell is now we can do all the computations using this unit cell, and that will sufficiently give us or appropriately give us the properties of the interface. So this is the 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are the 4 MDI neighboring MDI sites, and the unit cell is bounded by this neighboring 4 MDI sites. So the length of one site is 2.3 nanometer, and another site it is 1.33 nanometer. Now what about the other side? If we take this as the x along x direction, and this along the y direction, then along z direction it depends on how many layers of copper and how many layers of niobium we are considering. Now, before going into how many layers of copper and niobium we are actually considering, I would like to explain another site which we call as the non-MDI site along with the MDI site. So MDI site is the one where the copper and the niobium atoms sit over one another, whereas the niobium site we choose to be the one where the displacement among the two planes are maximum. So for all defect calculations, we consider when we calculate the formation energy and all, we consider these 2 representative sites, one MDI site and one non-MDI site. Well, now coming to the number of layers in Z direction. So we have already shown what the unit cell in the X and Y plane. So what about the Z direction? So what we take, we stack 4 layers of copper, 4 layers of niobium. Niobium 1, niobium 2, niobium 3, and niobium 4. Then copper 1, copper 2, copper 3, copper 4. So basically here copper 1 and niobium 1, they are the outermost layers, whereas copper 4 and niobium 4 are the interfacial layers. What we do is we freeze the outermost layers, that is copper 1 and niobium 1 layer, in order to simulate the bulk nature, because this is the interface, and the interface is not extended to the entire slab. So in order to represent the rest of the part of the slab, we freeze this so that it mimics the bulk part of the slab, and this one mimics the bulk part of the copper slab. The bulk part of the niobium 1 mimics the bulk part of the niobium slab, and this one the bulk part of the copper slab. And all the other 3 layers, copper 2, copper 3, copper 4, the niobium 2, niobium 3, niobium 4, they can relax, or they can move. The atoms can move. They are not fixed. Well, next we go for the calculation of formation energy of metallic monovacancy, helium interstitial, and vacancy helium complex. So metallic monovacancy is simply, it means that we have removed an atom from its regular lattice site, and that creates a metallic monovacancy. Then helium interstitial means and helium has been introduced in an interstitial position. Interstitial position basically means that it is not it is a site which is not a regular site occupied by the host atoms of the crystal structure. Then as far as vacancy helium complex is concerned, that basically means that we create a metallic monovacancy and then we place a helium interstitial nearby. Well, so these are the formation energies, vacancy formation energies. This is the vacancy formation energy of the interfacial copper layer. Then vacancy formation energy, helium interstitial formation energy of interfacial copper layers, and vacancy helium cluster formation energy of the interfacial copper layers. Now, in all these three cases, we see that we have two values. One is for the MDI site and another is for the non-MDI site. Now, in all three cases, the formation energy of the copper layer at the copper atom at the copper defect at the non-MDI site is greater than that of the MDI site. So that basically means that it is easy to create a metallic vacancy or a helium interstitial or a vacancy helium cluster at the MDI site rather than the non-MDI site. This can be attributed to the fact that at the MDI site, since the copper and the niobium atoms, they are sitting at the top of each other, they are in a somewhat strained state. So whenever a vacancy is formed or a helium interstitial formed, then somehow the strain gets released, and therefore it facilitates the formation of the defect. Now, same is the case for niobium interfacial layer at MDI and not non-MDI sites. When we calculated the formation energies for niobium at MDI and non-MDI site, we observed the same trend, that it is convenient, or it is easier to form the defects at MDI site rather than the non-MDI site. Well, so however, now if we move from the interfacial layer to the next interfacial layers, and these are niobium 4 and copper 4 are the immediate interfacial layers. Now if we move upward for niobium 3 and copper 3, so first we are considering the copper 3 layers. So we have seen that the vacancy formation energy trend of copper 3 layer is same as that of the copper 4 layer. That is, it is easier to form a vacancy at the MDI site than the non-MDI site. However, as soon as we come to the case of helium interstitial, then we see that in this case, the formation energy of copper 3 at the MDI and non-MDI site is almost same. So it is they have the equal. Energetically they are almost equal. And in case of vacancy helium cluster, the trend becomes opposite. That means for copper 3 layer, as soon as we go to copper 3 layers from copper 4 layer, then the vacancy formation energy at the MDI site is higher than that at the non-MDI site. So this basically means that with the MDI site, with the strained copper and niobium atoms at the MDI site, it actually becomes more expensive to create a vacancy helium cluster at the MDI site rather than the non-MDI site. Well, the trend is for niobium 4, though there is a little difference than for niobium 3, the trend is more or less same as copper 3 in case of vacancy formation. However, it has slightly reversed. There is a very small difference between MDI, the vacancy formation energy of MDI and non-MDI site, the green bars. And same is the case with helium interstitial, they are almost same. And the trend is similar as for niobium 3 as in the case of copper 3, that it is always easier to form a vacancy helium cluster in non-MDI site than MDI site. Well, next we were interested in looking into the mobility of the vacancy or the interstitial across the planes and along the planes. Okay. So this is the side view. We have these are the copper layers. This is the interfacial copper layer, and this is the interfacial niobium layer. This is the cross-sectional view. So what happens if we place the blue one is a helium atom. So if we place a helium atom near the interfacial copper layer at the MDI site, then what happens after the full relaxation? If we allow the structure to relax fully, then we saw that the helium atom, though it was initially placed near the copper plane, it has a tendency to move towards the niobium plane. So in the relaxed structure, the helium atom has migrated from the copper plane to the all across the interface to the niobium plane. However, this cannot be visualized from here, but we have actually in this plot, in this particular picture, a vacancy has been created in the copper plane. Now, as soon as a vacancy is created, after creation of the vacancy, after inserting the vacancy, now if we again relax the system, then that helium atom, which initially moved towards the niobium atom, it comes back to the copper plane. Okay, so first of all, there was no defect. We placed a helium atom at the MDI site of the copper plane. Then we relaxed the system. Then the helium atom has moved towards the niobium plane. But as soon as we create a vacancy at the MDI site in the copper plane, and then relax the system, then the helium atom comes back to the MDI site of the copper plane, interfacial copper plane. So that basically means there is a mobility of the it is the interstitial which is mobile across the plane. Now, if we consider the case if we come to the in plane case, that means we are in the same plane. Now we are in the copper plane. So in the same plane, if we create a metallic monovacancy and we place a helium interstitial and then we relax the system, then what happens? The atom which was closer to the helium interstitial, it moves towards the vacancy. So here the atom which was initially here has moved to the vacancy, and the interstitial has slightly shifted its position. So we can consider this case to be something like it is just like the vacancy has moved. In this case, the vacancy has moved. That is, when we consider the in plane case, it is the vacancy which is more mobile than the interstitial, whereas across the plane, it is the interstitial which has more mobility than the vacancy. Well, next we were interested in to observe what happens if we keep on adding more and more helium. Okay, so this is the case with one helium atom. As we have this case, we have already explained that without the defect. So this is a pure system, niobium plane. Without the defect, if we place a helium atom near a niobium plane, then it even after the full structural relaxation, it remains near the niobium plane. It sticks to the niobium plane. Now, if we add another, what happens if we add another, the second helium atom? So when we add the second helium atom and do structural relaxation, then we see that in this case also, even that first helium atom is still there, the second helium atom also approaches the same site it approaches the same site, but at the cost of some structural deformation in this layer. We can clearly see that this layer has undergone some structural deformation. Same is the case with the third helium atom, fourth helium atom, and fifth helium atom. So up to fifth helium atom, we have seen that the helium atoms, though they are getting a little bit distributed over the neighboring sites, so but they are still sticking to the niobium plane. Okay, they are not trying to go away from the niobium plane towards the interface or towards the copper plane. But of course, as we go on adding more and more helium atoms, that is interstitial atoms, the structural deformation also increases in the plane, in that particular plane. Now, in the presence of metallic vacancy, that means earlier it was a case where there was no metallic vacancy, but in this case, in the niobium plane, so here you can see that in this view, top view, it is clear that the niobium atom at this place is absent. That means we have a metallic vacancy at this place. So if we now place the helium atom and then relax the system, it obviously, as expected, it sticks to this site. Okay, in the side view it is not visible, but it is here. The helium atom is in the vacancy. It has actually taken up the place of the metallic monovacancy. Now this is the second atom. We add the second atom, then we see that it is still there. It is there near the site. Third atom, fourth atom, fifth atom. So unlike the previous case, in this case we have seen that as long as we have 5 atoms, the atoms are not glued to the initial site, that is the MDI site. Rather, it has got distributed to the nearby sites. Whereas if we have a metallic vacancy, then up to the 5 atoms, we see that the metallic vacancy is strong enough to trap all the 5 atoms in this particular site. Okay, this is for the case of niobium plane. Now, what happens if we go for if we observe the same thing in pure copper plane? We start with the copper plane in the pure system. So this is 1 atom, 1 interstitial atom, 1 helium atom. This is the case with 2 helium atoms. This is the case with 3 helium atoms. So in all the cases, here I want to insist you that this helium atom was actually placed near the copper plane. Okay, but after relaxation, it has moved towards the niobium plane. Same is the case with the second one, the third one, the fourth one, and the fifth one. Okay, this has disappeared. Okay, so whatever it is, even if we go on placing the helium atoms near the copper plane, they always have a tendency to move towards the copper plane. The niobium plane. So with lot of distortion, in the niobium plane, all the 5 atoms has moved from the copper plane to the niobium plane, interfacial copper plane to the interfacial niobium plane. Now, what happens to the same thing when we place a metallic vacancy? Okay, so earlier we have already observed for 1 helium atom case. Now we are going to add more helium atoms case. So as soon as we place a metallic vacancy in the copper plane, then you can see there is this blue one is the helium interstitial. So it has come back to the copper plane, and it has actually more or less occupied the metallic monovacancy site. Then, but it could trap the vacancy, the metallic monovacancy in the copper site could trap only 1 atom, 1 helium atom. Now, as soon as we add the second helium atom, it could not, this vacancy could not trap the helium atom, the second helium atom. So it has again moved towards the niobium plane. So is the second and third. So is the fourth one and the fifth one. So the metallic monovacancy in the copper plane was strong enough only to capture or trap only 1 helium interstitial or helium atom. The other helium atoms were they again had a tendency to move towards the niobium plane. Next, we so what in this plot. Now, why these things happens, we'll address a little bit later. So we also calculated the energetics of helium clustering. That means what are the formation energies? In earlier bar diagrams, we have shown the formation energies only for one helium atom. Now these are the energetics or the formation energy of the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 helium atoms. So as we can see that though there is a small fluctuation, but the formation energy is more or less, it has not changed a lot. In case of, there are fluctuations, but not much in case of copper 4 layer, that is the copper interfacial layer. Now this is the case of copper same layer, the copper 4 layer. As we go on in adding the first, second, third, and fourth helium atom, but with a vacancy added to the layer. Then this is the case for the yellow line is the case for niobium 4 layer without vacancy, and with vacancy we have seen that all these red, blue, and yellow lines. So they are more or less, they follow the same trend. But as soon as we consider the vacancy and interstitial cluster in niobium 4 layer, that is the niobium interfacial layer. So from the first, this is the point for one helium atom. This is the point for 2 helium atoms. So the formation energy of the second helium atom or 2 helium atoms, formation energy of 2 helium atoms drastically decreases than the formation energy of 1 helium atom. And so is the case for the third one, or the number 3 helium atoms, then 4 helium atoms, and 5 helium atoms. That means the presence of, so we can interpret it something like this: the presence of a single helium atom at the niobium site. So at the MDI site, in the niobium layer at the MDI site, it is somehow facilitating in trapping the second, third, fourth, and fifth helium atoms. Next, we calculated the trapping energy of the interstitial heliums or helium atoms. So by trapping energy, we basically we use this trapping energy basically characterizes that how much energy is required for a metallic monovacancy to trap a helium atom from a distant interstitial place or interstitial site. So in this case, when we say distant interstitial site, we mean a site which is more than 10 Armstrong away from the metallic monovacancy. And by definition, the negative trapping energy means an exothermic process. So that means that means up to so here we can clearly see that up to 5 helium atoms, the trapping energy is negative. That means up to high 5 helium atoms, accumulation of 5 helium atoms, the process is exothermic. That basically means that it is energetically favorable. Okay, trapping of helium atoms at the monovacancy site up to 5 numbers is energetically favorable. Okay, in both the cases, both for the copper 4 and the niobium 4 layers. Now, from all these observations, we actually encounter 3 questions. I would say we encounter 3 questions from all the observations we have described through the figures. So why helium atoms show affinity towards niobium layer? Then why a metallic vacancy traps a helium atom? And thirdly, why the presence of one helium atom favors the accommodation of other helium atoms? Well, in order to answer the first and the second question, we calculated the charge density and the Voronoi volume of the interface structure. As soon as, so it is obvious that as soon as we attach one layer, one metallic layer of one metal type with a layer of another metal type, then first of all there will be structural distortion, and secondly there will be charge transfer. And since they are insoluble, they do not diffuse from one layer to another. The atoms do not diffuse. There is no interlayer diffusion. So we get a clear interface, but these two things will happen. So structural deformation as well as charge transfer. Now, we calculated the charge by calculating the charge density plot by showing this is the charge density plot actually. So this clearly shows us the red color basically means charge accumulation, and the blue color means charge depletion, and these yellow spots are the interfacial niobium atoms, and these blue spots are the interfacial copper atoms. Now this red region here is towards the copper plane, interfacial copper plane. So this clearly indicates that there is some amount of transfer of charge from the niobium layer to the copper layer. That means the interfacial copper layer is, there is a charge accumulation near the interfacial copper layer, and there is a charge depletion near the interfacial niobium layer. And moreover, if we calculate the average Voronoi volume, Voronoi volume is that basically gives us how much volume is available for the interstitial atom. So we see that the niobium plane offers a bigger Voronoi volume than that of the copper plane. That is, and that is why actually the defects or the interstitials, the helium atoms, they find more comfortable to sit in the niobium plane than in the copper plane. So since we have a charge deficient region, and as we have already mentioned that helium atoms, as we all know, that they are inert atoms, so they always have a tendency to move towards the charge depleted region, so that no distortion of the positive or negative charge transfers takes place, because that is energetically it is going to be very, very expensive. So they always have the helium atoms always have a tendency to go towards the lower charge density region. Now this is the region why actually the helium atoms, they showed affinity towards the niobium layer. And as for the second case, actually as soon as we create a metallic monovacancy in the copper layer, we have not shown the plot here, but as soon as we remove one atom from here, from the regular side, then it creates a lower charge density region than the niobium layer. So this is the reason why the helium atom, as soon as the metallic monovacancy is created, the helium atom comes back from the niobium layer to the copper layer. So this basically, this charge density and helium, this thing basically explains the first two questions. As for the third one, what we did, we concentrated to this region, the MDI region, and rather than calculating the charge density and the average charge density of the entire planes, we calculated the charge density for this particular region, so this shows the three-dimensional charge density difference plot, and this is the 2D projection of the same plot across this plane, across this XY plane, this blue plane. So this is the 2D projection. Now this Xi'an region is actually the surge, it indicates surge depletion, whereas this yellow region, they indicate surge accumulation in this case. And here, according to this scale in the 2D projection, it is very clear over here that when a helium atom is present in the vacant site, in the metallic vacancy site, then it creates a surge depleted region. This blue is for surge depleted. So as soon as we add a helium atom in the metallic monovacancy, then it takes up the metallic monovacancy site and it creates a surge depleted region around it, and which is further surrounded by a surge accumulated regions. Now, this is the reason why the presence of one helium atom, it facilitates or it attracts or it is capable of trapping the other helium atoms. And as in the previous case, we also calculated the average Voronoi volume per helium atom. Earlier, it was for the entire layer. So in this case, it is the average Voronoi volume per helium atom. So here we see that when we add one helium atom, the average Voronoi volume is something like this: 12 in case of copper and 19 in case of niobium. Then as soon as we go on adding more and more helium atoms, the average Voronoi volume, that is the volume or the space available for the helium atoms, decreases. However, we see that up to if we have the Voronoi volume of the order of 9, then it is sufficient. Up to that point, at least we know that it is sufficient to trap the helium atoms. Now, all throughout, actually, we have done. You see that we have stopped at 5 helium atoms. Why? Because all these calculations were done with the help of the density functional theory, and each of these calculations are very, very expensive because we have to deal with hundreds of numbers of atoms, both in the copper slab and in the niobium slab. So it was not possible computationally from with the available computational resources to go beyond 5 helium atoms. But it would be actually really a very interesting study to understand, or to observe or to record up to how many helium atoms a metallic monovacancy is capable of trapping. Well, I summarize this talk by mentioning these points. That here we have seen the effect of vacancy interstitial interactions, and also the migration of both the vacancy and then the interstitial defects, and how they get clustered, they form clusters. Then we have observed that the helium atoms, they show affinity towards the niobium layer. They always have an affinity towards the niobium layer, and we have explained why it happens, because the niobium layer has a low surge density. They offer low surge density regions for the helium atoms. Then the vacancy sites are capable of trapping at least up to vacancy sites in the niobium layer. Interfacial niobium layer are capable of trapping at least up to 5 helium atoms. And it would always be interesting to know up to how many atoms, the helium atoms, it can trap. One can always go for those calculations. The mechanism of helium trapping can be explained in terms of surge density and Voronoi volume. So actually, neither only the surge density or the Voronoi volume factor is sufficient. So both has to complement each other. So only the lower surge density is not sufficient. At the same time, we must have sufficient Voronoi volume or to accommodate the helium atoms. And similarly, even if we have sufficient volume, if the surge density is very high, then the atom or the helium atom cannot be attracted to that particular site. Well, these are the computational details at a glance. We have all throughout used the density functional theory. The computational package is VAS. We have used VAS package. Then as for the exchange correlation function, we have used PW91, and for electron ion interaction, we have used projective augmented wave. I sincerely acknowledge Ujjal, who was my PhD student in this work, and Professor Ravinder Pandey from Michigan Tech University, USA, and Cesar from IFI MSc, Madrid, Spain. Thank you all. And if you have any question, please, I would like to answer your questions or clear any doubts as far as possible.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your expertise with us.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes,
Ma'am,
yes,
am I
I can
audible
hear.
to you? Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
So thank you, ma'am, for sharing your expertise with us on this field of density functional theory and on the basics of vacancy functionalities, defects in interface structure. Ma'am, there is one question in the chat box.
Yeah.
Uh, Please comment on the effects of defect present in the materials from device commercialization perspective.
How can I see the?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, first you have to stop your presentation.
Okay, okay.
Ma'am, here it is showing.
Yes, I have stopped the presentation.
Yes, ma'am.
Then,
Ma'am, in the
how
chat
do I
box.
see? Actually, I have used Google Meet for the first time today.
Yes, ma'am.
I usually use Zoom
Ma'am, in the
or
meeting
WebEx.
details, there is a tab message
Okay, okay. Meeting
in the right
details.
side, ma'am.
Yes, meeting details. Then I have to go to attachments.
No, ma'am, in the message there is a icon, message icon.
No, in the meeting details, I don't have a message icon. I just
Ma'am,
have.
it's about the participants, count of participants, then the site.
No. Okay, why don't you just read out the question?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, on the please comment on the effects of defects present in the materials from device commercialization perspective. If Kulvinder sir is online, he can also elaborate his question.
Yeah, I
Kulvinder,
have. I think in the very few first slide or the second or third slide, I did emphasize that the defects have, like if you cannot minimize the defects, may it be a Frankel defect, that means a point defect, just a simple vacancy, or interstitial or Frankel defect, or impurities. If you cannot minimize the defect, so ultimately the defects, they will get clustered, and they will damage. I have actually also seen, I have also shown the some images how the point defects and the impurities, they form voids or they form bubbles, and thereby they damage the structures. Now, when the defects damage the structures, that basically means it's a kind of corrosion. The corrosion takes place in the solid or in the material, and over time, the material, the strength of the material decreases. As time goes on, the strength of the material decreases, and as the strength of the material decreases, its performance also goes on decreasing. So it is very, for commercial purpose, it is it is very much essential. It is very important to understand the defects, which are the possible defect, formation of possible defects in the system, and how to minimize the defects. One cannot, of course, do away with the defects. I mean, defects will always be there, but the efforts are towards how to minimize the defect. Anything else? Am I clear?
Mr. Kulvinder Singh. Yes, thank you,
Okay.
ma'am, for
Okay.
clarification.
Okay. Anything
Any
else?
other question? Any other queries? Participants? Ma'am, how to calculate the value of bend edges using VASP?
What do you mean by band edges? Band gap or something
Maybe
else
I
you
think
want to?
it is wrongly written here. Maybe it should be band gap, I think.
Okay. Actually, see, DFT is DFT, using DFT is quantitatively never. It cannot give you a very accurate quantitative measurement of band gap. Okay, but like how do you calculate means you need to calculate the band structure, and then you have to find out the minimum I mean the deep in the conduction band and the high in the I mean the wave in the I mean the maximum energy value occupied by the valence band, and the difference will give you the band gap. But I warn you that the DFT is quantitatively. I mean, there you can always make qualitative observation that quantitatively DFT is not accurate for band gap calculations. You have to calculate the band structure. That's it. You have to calculate the band structure to estimate the band gap.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other query from participants? If you have any query, ma'am is connected with us. Any query related to the DFT study? No questions, ma'am.
Okay, that's fine.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Once again, thank you all for listening to this talk, and I was happy. I'm really happy to get this opportunity to share this work with you all. So I mean, if you have any question, and I mean, maybe in near future also, you can always mail me, and you can be in contact with me. I'd be happy to be of any help, offer any help to any one of you. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Ma'am. Ma'am, there is one question. Sorry, ma'am. There is one question just asked. Is it possible to calculate direct and indirect band gap in DFT?
See, it is always, once you have the band structure, you get, I mean, whether it is a direct band gap or indirect band gap, it doesn't matter. I mean, once you have the band structure, you have all the informations. But the point is that whether the numerical value is accurate or not, or how much it is closer to the experimental value. That's the only matter that you have to take care of. But otherwise, if you have calculated the band structure, then you get all the informations.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. I hope students have learned a lot from your lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Hoping to hear from you in future also.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.